What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, arm yourselves, life stuff. Now, this video doesn't have a unifying theme I can identify, but there are a few things I want to talk about. First, work stuff and what people are. For about a week now, I have been trying to deal with a hell problem. And I've been on call this entire time. And today has been my first break since it started, and that was because I woke up with food poisoning light symptoms. Anyway, to summarize the issue, our group needs to do one thing. But we can't do this one thing until this other group does this other thing, and we were under the assumption they had already done this other thing, and they hadn't. And now we're dealing with a deadline of Saturday, this Saturday. Now, as shitty as this is, and as devastating as this could have been if this were a big, huge problem, I think the reasonable solution would be to let this other group get their way, because they did this intentionally, and then next go round ensure it doesn't happen and put in place systems to ensure something like this never happens again. Because even if we go Don Corleone mode and use all of our powers to try to get this done, there's still a good chance that it won't get done for us, and if we do, it's going to ruin everything for everyone. I mean, even if we get what we want, that's still a lot of pressure and publics either not served or underserved. But Slim, the dude I answer to for the most part, is fed up and he wants to teach a lesson. And at first I was annoyed, but then I got a little more okay with it. Because you can look at this in two ways. Way one, this is our fault, and ultimately this is my fault. Our fault in the sense we don't have oversight systems in place. We have been operating on trust. Now, that trust keeps getting spat on, but we haven't done anything because it hasn't been super serious yet. And not that long ago, we caught something a little more serious. And we should have done something then. This time, it's still not super duper serious, but it could have been. So the fact we haven't put systems in place is our fault. And then on the my fault level, I could have forced it. I could have forced oversight into the equation, and I didn't. That's my bad. But then in the other way of looking at it, this is clearly malicious. The way this is going down, or the reason we're in this situation. Someone took advantage of our trust, and if we hadn't checked, we would be in a bad spot. We could have been in a very bad spot, and we wouldn't have been, thankfully, this time, but even if we hadn't checked at all, we would be in a bad spot. So although this is going to be an everybody loses situation to teach this lesson, I'm prepared to help teach that lesson. But it's like piloting a fighter jet beyond human capabilities with the explicit purpose of crashing the jet into something. It's a lot of work for something that's going to be bad. And essentially what's happening is we're being held hostage by a sphinx. Every day, the Sphinx gives you a new set of demands in the form of contradictory riddles. And at the same time, it wants you to do some event planning. It wants you to plan a wedding, but this wedding that it wants you to plan does not follow typical wedding fare, and it can't figure out what order it wants these things in. Even though there is a specific order these things do need to happen in. So which is it? Do you want to keep changing the order of things, or is there a specific way this needs to happen? Because if it's the latter, just tell us exactly what you want, what you need, in as clear a language as you can manage, and we'll try to get that done. But that's not the way any of this has been going. And then on top of that, you find out the Sphinx is cheating. The Sphinx keeps lying, and you catch the Sphinx in lies, but you can't do anything about it at this point because you're being held hostage. You can't do what you need to do until this Sphinx has been satisfied, and it doesn't want what it wants. So we finally get everything in enough order we can engage the next necessary party. Because what's the most important part of a bureaucracy? Spreading out the power. Now, in a dumb shit democratic way of thinking, this is good. This ensures nobody has too much power, there are checks and balances, and everybody needs to be working together to get everything done. Beautiful thinking. Now, in practice, the problem with democracy, especially if you have no way of giving one or two people or creating an oligarchy to ensure things get done, is if one person with an essential job decides for any number of reasons they're not going to cooperate at all, you can't do anything. It's like spending an entire week arguing with someone to get them to give you the information you need to fill out a file to give to a firefighter to start putting out a fire. And we just reached that spot yesterday. Everything as clear as we can get it, and I know it's going to change, and this is not going to end well, but we got the paperwork together, we handed it off to the firefighter. Now, the issue, or one of the many issues, do you remember, it might have been a year ago at this point, I stood up for a woman who was getting bullied by another woman. The bully is the Sphinx, and the firefighter is the woman who's getting bullied. And something happened a few weeks ago that I didn't talk about or vent about on the channel because it sounds like a good thing, and my dumb fucking viewers are going to perceive it as a good thing, but it's not a good thing. That woman I stood up for approached me quietly and gave me a bunch of information that would cause serious damage to the bully's ability to function. And it was a lot. And it wasn't enough to seize on anything. It was enough to put pressure, but not enough to create any serious permanent change. But it would be enough to put a bow on a case when the bully really screws something up. And if you're dumb, that sounds like a positive thing. This woman you helped came back and helped you out. And that is the way she framed it, and it is helpful, but there was no camaraderie or goodwill in that action. No, that is handing somebody else a gun to go shoot the person who was fucking with you. And because my brain is mixed up, to be clear, we got everything we needed and sent 2 days ago. Yesterday was the first day of waiting. And that's the state we're still in. This woman is normally very professional, very quick. And now, because we are giving her a lot of stuff to do that I'm guessing she perceives as aiding this bully, she's gone radio silent, even though we're paying her. So we've gotten everything we needed together to start putting out the fire officially, and the person we've hired to do that is not doing anything. The fire is just burning, and we are getting ever closer to our deadline. So we're in this situation that is spite from all ends. And no matter how it turns out, it is not going to be good for anybody. My leadership wants to stab itself to hurt somebody else. This head of committee bully wants to stab herself to hurt everybody else. This firefighter wants to stab herself to hurt everybody else. And what I've learned in administration and leadership and all this shit and corporate is this is not uncommon. This is the way people operate. I have watched organizations with millions and millions and millions of donated dollars stab themselves to hurt other people. That's the default. I'm sure on a shadow level that is partially why Americans hated, well, certain sorts of insurgents, also certain sorts of pilots, perhaps in past wars. Or pilots in more recent wars too, actually, because they are witnessing enemies doing exactly what they do every single day, every single moment of their lives, except instead of doing it with other people's money, or with your own money, just self-harming to harm others, they are taking that to the extreme and using their entire lives, throwing away their entire lives to harm others. It is a level of commitment Americans are incapable of, and it is a reminder of what an American is and what an American does that's a little aggravating and uncomfortable to confront. And maybe that's partially why I woke up vomiting and shitting and crying and pissing. But not, but not coming. Not then. That would come later. Now, we'll get into industrial schizophrenia shortly, but I wanted to start this video with this work situation because sometimes when you make videos and you feel like you should put topics together, you find the connections as you're talking. So my Eastern European sweater came in, my Vladic brutal fit, and my brother slash brat fit. I haven't watched it yet, but I have a playlist set up for it because the one with the decent subtitles is broken into parts instead of one video. But thank you, Russian viewer, for recommending that to me. It's queued. Now, it feels like this sweater weighs more than I do. This is the coldest weather sweater I think I've ever owned. It's also the softest. I feel like a swaddled baby wearing it. And I think it does have this goofy intimidation factor to it. Because when I first put it on, it looks like one of those virgin killer sweaters you see in tasteful media. And I was not at all at first reminded of Vladic Brutal. I was reminded of that shaven husband from the other guys, the Arnie Palmies guy. But then I stared at myself in the mirror, and I realized that I look like an absolute unit in this thing. It stopped looking silly, and it started tapping into a vibe I like, which is warm and cozy, and also absolute unitism. I look like Hemingway. I look like a seafaring gorilla. I look like a gangster on good terms with his grandmother. So I go outside, and I'm sitting outside, and it's a quiet day, nobody's around, it's peaceful, the sun is starting to set. Well, it's not setting, but it's getting lower, and it's just a little warm, and it's cold, but the breeze is nice. And I'm smoking my pipe in my metal, like, camping rocking chair, feeling like an old man. And the sweater is this huge, straight compression jacket. It is locking you in to warmth and comfort. And my sick, drained, exhausted ass fell asleep in a chair smoking. I don't know the last time I've fallen asleep in a chair nodding off style. I've fallen asleep in chairs intentionally, but just going outside to have a smoke and then passing out, that was an uncommon, unexpected pleasantness. But then I had a dream that, when I woke up, I needed to think about. In my dream, people were beginning to disappear, and everyone thought it was thanks to hikers being stupid or something. But then there started, or I sighted some of these shadow beings, and some other people had mentioned them, but there hadn't been any coverage on them. So I put on a balaclava, and dreams are messages from the deep. After I had a dream about a balaclava, well, not about a balaclava, but including a balaclava. Wake up, Commando Store has restocked their Nito balaclava. If you want one and you didn't get one on the first run, now's the time to do it. Anyway, I'm wearing this balaclava with the mouth hole cut open. I have my surprise tool for later 9, and there's a game called Intravenous that captures the vibe of what was starting to go on. My goal was to locate, kill, and eat certain criminals I thought might either have trafficking or occult connections and would know what was going on, because when you eat people, you gain their knowledge. But then this cop woman stopped me before I could do anything. And the situation she stopped me in, all I could think was, if I haven't done anything yet. But if I cooperate, I'm going to jail forever, or I'm going to get shot or something. Meaning, I could go with option B, which is extricate myself from this situation violently and commit to the disappearances, supernatural hunting aspect at the cost of my civilized life, but neither happened. She didn't kill or ruin me, I didn't kill or ruin her, and our exchange was productive, because I found out officials knew about these disappearances, and she wasn't privy to all the information, but she knew something was going on, and nobody was doing anything about it. And then the dream timeline got wonky, because then we teamed up. She investigated and interrogated suspects, quotes legally, acting the way cops act, doing to them what I thought she was going to try to do to me, and then my job was to step in when the violence went beyond civilized. Civilized meaning letting a cop woman who's like 120 pounds beat on you as a 220-pound man, and to then eat them and get their memories and move the case forward. And I know that went on for a while, but in the dream time perception, it did not last that long. What lasted a lot longer was this weird dating thing this cop and I got into. I remember there was a point, a switch flipped, and we became very attracted to each other. And it was weird because the dream did not go wet. Essentially, we spent a few months eating at different mid-scale chain restaurants like Applebee's and holding hands. And I say when I woke up I needed to think about it because this entire dream felt symbolic. Although if you're just looking at images, it feels like just a series of images with a weird progression. Something was going on here. This cop woman represented something, and I represented something because although I was me in my dream, I was not me exactly. And the concluding segment, the having dinner and holding hands repeatedly, felt almost agrarian, pastoral, to use the writing term. Except it's a lawbreaker and a lawmaker in like an industrial or hyper-capitalist Eden. Really weird. And that made me think about nature and civilization. What sorts of rules or methods does civilization follow versus what nature follows, and what does a being, or what do beings, one raised in civilization, one raised in nature, how are they different? And I forget the story, but I think it's the one about breaking into the tower, in which Conan is he's still new to civilization and he's thinking about this exact thing. Different expectations, different environments creating different people based on the rules applied to them. Because civilization is not law and order. It's not rule of law. Law and order and rule of law don't exist. Now, civilization isn't always outright trying to kill you. Civilization is always outright trying to exploit you. And if killing enters the equation, then that's just what happens. But because civilization and because humans are nowhere near as refined as nature, trying to achieve this goal of exploitation is schizophrenic. It's bipolar. It's insane. It's inconsistent. Law enforcement is supposed to represent law, the thing that separates us from nature and quotes chaos. But cops are nuts. They're sociopaths. They aren't even psychopaths because psychopaths would not be this erratic all the time. The state of law enforcement reflects the state of laws, and laws reflect the state or the soul of civilization, which is to say, it wants to exploit you, but it doesn't really know how to do it, so it's going to throw shit at the wall and do anything to try to make that happen. And that's difficult because if you're... There it is. There's the connection, or one of the connections. If you're playing the civilization game, you don't know what you need to do or when you need to do it. Sounds a lot like my work situation. We're trying to be civil. We're trying to express nastiness in a civilized way, and these expectations, there's no way to do anything because we don't care about law or the rule of law. We don't care about the mechanisms we would need to uphold to keep society moving in a good direction. We've built rules we are utterly uninterested in following, and our rule keepers are the greatest expression of that failing. Versus nature. Elegance. And nature is not a positive thing. I'm not someone who views nature as what we need to return to or something that should be idolized. Nature wants to kill us. Nature isn't stupid, and nature isn't weak either. Nature is one of the great enemies, and one of the great teachers, because it's trying to kill us all the time. And it's so strong, and it's so clever. Conan. If Conan is what spawned the barbarian appreciation, modern barbarian appreciation is kind of like civilization, evolving from nature, right? Because the modern idea of barbarian is this big, dumb brute who gets angry and hits things, versus actual barbarian, nature-raised, the original OG Conan, described most often as a predatory cat, as clever as he is strong. And if Conan is going to go berserker mode, it's not berserking, it's not that he's not in control, it is more like his instincts, his killing instincts, are so finely tuned, he moves like an animal. But it's not this out-of-control rage, it is honed instinct. And I also love that Conan almost never outright wins. He usually wins, but he doesn't get exactly what he wants, or he needs to sacrifice something to survive. Really great writing. And Conan is also a pretty obvious bad guy, which is another thing I've been thinking about. Why do we need to idolize the utterly unrealistic, quotes, good guys all the time? if you tried to be an idealistic good guy in real life, if you've ever been stupid enough actually to try that, it never goes well. You reach this level of understanding in civilization or society conditioning that if you ever try to go out of your way to do something good for someone, you will be punished for it. No good deed goes unpunished. That's not just a saying, these are not empty words. If you try to do something you think is good, and just because you think it's good doesn't mean it's good, you will suffer for it. You will be punished for it. This is a much larger topic, probably for a different video, but in case we never make that video, I think judging characters based on their ability to achieve the results they want and their reasoning for choosing those results specifically might serve us better in our brain space. Idolizing a character like Luke Skywalker is like expecting Common Core to prepare you for the real world. That is not the way things work. Tolkien and his consequences have been disastrous for the human race. Anyway, nature is straightforward. It wants you not to be alive. There is never any confusion about that. And when the expectations that raise you are centered around trying not to die, you become more competent quicker because the game is hard, but you know what game you're playing. Versus civilization. You don't know, you know you're going to be exploited. That's what they're trying to do to you. But you don't know what tricks they're going to use. You don't know what form that exploitation is going to come in. And the difficulty with that is sometimes exploitation involves death, sometimes it doesn't. So some people might feel inclined just to be exploited and then get shocked when death enters the picture, versus the wild man, the Conan, who knows that if you just roll over and let it happen, you're going to get killed. But maybe what it boils down to is focus, because I think what my dream was trying to show me was two expressions of violence. On the one hand, civilization violence. It'll kill, but it's erratic, it's confused, it doesn't know how to measure its own force because it doesn't know what it wants to do. Does it want to exploit you? Does it want to kill you? It knows it wants to hurt you, but it doesn't really know what it wants. And it acts in a way that makes perfect sense for somebody who doesn't know what they want. Versus this dream version of me that was a lot more straightforward. I kill and eat you so I can figure out what has been killing and eating other people so I can kill and eat it so it can't kill and eat me. And I'm beginning to think the supernatural element was there. These weren't just normal murders, to examine or get me to think about the ways these different mindsets approach things they don't understand. Right? The civilization, the cop woman, knew something was going on and she wanted to do something about it, but she didn't know what she was allowed to do, she didn't know who knew what, and she was stagnating in this weird, violent, but also not going anywhere state, which I think is true to life. Versus the character I was playing that knew exactly what needed to happen. Lots of violence and hunting until the threat went away. She was representing violence in a legal framework. The character I was playing represented violence in a nature framework. Frequent but, quotes, acceptable and ultimately pointless versus dreadful but cogent. Civilization knows it needs to wield violence or wants to wield violence, but it doesn't know how to do it and it doesn't know what to wield it against. So it wields it against itself, hoping that will make the big, scary, unsolvable problem go away. Versus nature-type violence. doing anything and everything necessary to make yourself not get killed. My recording software keeps fucking up, and I just had a nice long thought that got corrupted. So bear with me while I try to work my way through this. Man versus nature. People act like returning to monkey makes you one with nature, because we are one with nature, and I think we are one with nature, but in this man versus nature context, the wild man context, there is also a distinct separation there, like one point on a star. The star is made up of the points, but the point is singular. And in this context, for man, nature is an enemy and a teacher. Things get wonky when you get into civilization, because civilization is trying to be nature, but civilization is man. So how can man, raised in civilization, instruct and be an enemy to himself in any way that is not hyper destructive to himself and everyone else? Because if you, young fella, aspire to being a nature adjacent, then how are you going to teach when you don't know shit? And are you really going to attack yourself, or are you going to attack other people and then be attacked by other people in kind? Civilization makes no sense. It's the blind leading and then beating the shit out of the blind and then getting killed by the threat nobody addressed. Because how do you address it? How do you address a threat from a game you don't understand? So what does it mean in this dream that a representation of civilization and a representation of nature are both collaborating in their expressions of violence to solve a problem, and then they get distracted and hold hands and go to Applebee's? I have no idea what that means. But recently, I'll sometimes feel like I'm dying. We've talked about my health shit before. My body works. I'm thankful for it. But it's screwing with me. It always does weird shit or doesn't cooperate at bad times, probably to psych me out. But recently and this has been going on for a couple months, when I say recently, I'll be lying on my side trying to go to sleep, and I feel like my heart is heavy. Not metaphorically, but literally, like it's sedimented, calcified. My hair is graying faster. I'm not in certified salt and pepper mode yet, but we're at over 20 gray hairs on my head. And unless I am swimming in chemicals and whatever that doom drum feeling is, that executive mode, all I want to do is lie on the ground. Or like what happened earlier, except a hammock would have been better. Wear my big, fuzzy, compressed coffin and smoke and die. And we talk about dying. Of course you don't actually want to die, but you just want to gradient your way into non-existence without worrying about anything. Is that what the ending of the dream meant? Because even if this YouTube thing or any of my other shit really does take off, and I wouldn't have to work a square job anymore, I probably would, because there's a level of grounding here. And I feel like I am part of the supraculture, even though I'm not. Is this dream suggesting to me that these issues that I'm super concerned with are going to disappear once I start a family? If I start a family. And I'm trying to work this out based on how that last segment of the dream made me feel. Do you understand the pain of being a hugger and being conditioned your entire life not to be? Holding hands and hugging and sitting beside each other felt so comforting. But at the same time, that dream felt, or that part of the dream felt like it dragged on forever, and I'm left wondering, what are we doing? Aren't there disappearances we're trying to deal with? Don't you have respectable, law-abiding citizens to beat on and abuse because you know they won't fight back? Don't I have less than law-abiding citizens to shoot and eat? I enjoyed the calmness and the comfort of that last segment, but something intense was missing. She wasn't looking sharp in her outfit. I wasn't wearing my horror balaclava. We were wearing nice bullshit middle class clothes and eating those Chili's, that's what it was. Eating the mini burgers from Chili's. I don't know, but this dream was a loaded one. And I would like to wear my sweater and turn into Hemingway without necessarily turning out like him. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.